Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media. It is Wednesday nights and talking to myself, Inayet Wadee. And once again, a panel discussion looking at issues that impact on us on a global and a local level. Now, the last few weeks or the last few programs, we have been focusing extensively on what is taking place in Palestine, and we haven't lost sight of the unfolding genocide and also taking a look at what is taking place in Lebanon. But there are many other issues that are playing out, and this is where we take a look at the power of big corporates, particularly those emanating from the West and also other parts around the world. And one industry in particular that we want to focus on is the pharmaceutical industry. Now, we know that this is a very, very powerful industry right across the entire world. And we will recall during COVID-19 as well, the whole issue surrounding vaccinations as well. But just generally, when we're looking at the pharmaceutical industry, we're looking at the corporates, we're looking at big pharma in general. And questions have been raised, whether they have been of benefit to humankind in general, to the African continent, and also looking at the harms that have been caused on the African continent as a result of big pharma. And we're not only talking about COVID-19, but we're talking about many other health conditions that emanate right across the entire world. And you will recall even a disease like Ebola, where we've seen the French sending in an army to take care of Ebola, and the role of big pharma as well, together with many of these predatory corporations who have been indulging in misconduct, often violating human rights without any accountability. And this includes the involvement of many other corporations like big banks, the mining industry, companies like Monsanto, and we know genetically modified foods, pesticides, together with big pharma. Now, is there a link? And sometimes big pharma would often admit that their products have adverse effects, but the question is, are they held accountable for the harm that they are causing? And this is the reason why we are having this all important discussion. And we've got people talking about their own personal experiences with big pharma, talking about advocacy to demand transparency, accountability. And tonight, the panel discussion, we have got the pleasure of Shabnam Palesa Mohamed, who is an activist, a journalist, and a lawyer. We've got Shukri Arnold, a big pharma survivor and also a VAERS ambassador, and also Rooksana, Reyazzudin, all of them coming on screen right now. And right top of the screen, Shabnam, assalamu alaikum to you and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam, Inayet, and shukran to you and Salam Media for the opportunity to speak truth with power.
Rooksana, to you, assalamu alaikum, welcome.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me.
And Shukri Arnold, should I say shukran to you? Your name is Shukri as well. Shukran, assalamu alaikum for your time.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you and shukran to you for inviting me onto your panel this evening. And assalamu alaikum to all your viewers and your listeners.
Well, Shabnam, you and I have had this discussion many a time, and I think for a very, very long time, we've actually been wanting to have this discussion. It's an important discussion, and looking just at yourself, founder of Transformative Health Justice, Steering Committee, World Council for Health in South Africa, Executive Director, Children's Health Defense Africa. So you've got a huge interest in the topic that we are discussing, and you've had some very personal experiences as well with regard to the harm that have been caused by big pharma products. So let's start off by talking, and we are talking about big pharma crimes in Africa in general, because often Africa being vulnerable, Africa being held hostage by the big pharmaceutical corporations as well. So let's just start off by talking about some of your own experiences with regard to the harm that is caused by big pharma.
Shukran, Inayet, really valuable question. You know, many of us don't realize that neocolonialism is actually being perpetrated through corporations. As you rightly mentioned, the banks, the pharmaceutical industry, big agri represented by Monsanto, etc. They exploit our health, our resources, and our minds, even big media as well, in many ways. And so I'm really glad that we're having this discussion from the context of the African continent, which is often overlooked when crimes are exposed in other parts of the world. From a personal perspective, I was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia many years ago. I was told there was no cause, there was no cure, and I had a few good years left. And I was given a whole laundry list of medication to take, which had an even longer laundry list of adverse effects, probably about 50 different adverse effects. It was absolutely horrendous and changed my life completely. I struggled with these adverse effects so much from this medication, this drug, for the rare form of leukemia. It was giving me anxiety and depression. And then I was put on antidepressants to deal with that side effect, which is essentially how the profit model of big pharma works, right? There's no cure, there's no profit in cure. Eventually, I got so exhausted and miserable with the adverse effects, both physically and mentally, and seeing the effect on my family having to care for me, that I physically threw all of these drugs, these toxins out of the window and decided I would rely only on the Almighty. And together with the support of my family, and natural medicines, Alhamdulillah, I am completely healed. So I have seen the power of natural medicines and refuse to be a part of this endless profit cycle of the pharmaceutical industry, which is, of course, as you rightly said, predatory. And I know of hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who've turned to natural health and healed as a result. But it is a responsibility to talk about our experiences. So if those who are suffering from pharmaceutical products know that they're not alone, and that's part of why we're doing the show today. I'm happy to share that natural products have also helped my father to heal from his condition. So on a very personal level, I have personal experience, and the advocacy to expose big pharma and to empower us about our health is personal.
Well, shukran for that, Shabnam. And let's just bring Rooksana into the discussion. And I know we'd like to not only limit this discussion to COVID-19 and the COVID-19 vaccines, because there are many other issues that we'd like to speak about. And also, most recently, we've heard about polio in Gaza, in Palestine, in a particular, and we know, all these vaccines obviously have some effect, and we know at this point in time that there are thousands upon thousands of children that are being vaccinated for polio as a result of the outbreak in Gaza in particular. But we will talk about that a bit later. But just to bring Rooksana into the discussion, and as I mentioned, we won't limit this to COVID-19, although many people are suffering adverse effects as a result of taking the COVID vaccine. Personally, many people have spoken to me about this as recent as yesterday when I was at a hospital, and I was talking to one of the people that visited the hospital, and she mentioned to me that she was suffering from some effects after having taken the vaccine. Now, Rooksana, just looking at yourself as well, because you took the COVID-19 shot as a precondition to an Umrah prize that you had won. Now, just take us through your experiences.
So, Assalamu alaikum to all the listeners. Like I've said, I worked in the health industry, and I come from the natural side of it. So I was always someone for the natural. And during the pandemic, I worked very closely with COVID positive patients as well. And Alhamdulillah, I was quite confident about my health. There was no issues. I had no previous medical history. So there was nothing that alarmed me, or I was not afraid. And Alhamdulillah, we know if you put your tawakkul in Allah, there's no reason to be afraid, provided you take your precautions. So just 2 days prior to lockdown, Alhamdulillah, I won a Umrah package, a fully paid Umrah package for my husband and myself, and we haven't been for Umrah as yet. So because it was 2 days to lockdown, the sponsors did mention that once the travel ban was lifted and it was safe to travel again, it will be honored and we would be able to go. However, when the travel bans were all lifted and travel was allowed, it was mandatory to be vaccinated to go for Umrah or to go anywhere, basically, to do anything. And because my husband and I has not been, so we decided to go and take the vaccination. And with my husband, alhamdulillah, he didn't have any side effects at that time. And with me, immediately while I was there, they made me wait for about 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes, I did feel a bit of a headache coming on, which I did mention to the pharmacist. And she did say that it was one of the known side effects that you could experience. Was all I was told was you could have a fever, you could have a headache. Those were normal symptoms. Go home, take a Panado, and it should be fine. I came home, and within 3 hours, but in that 3 hours, I just was feeling extremely fatigued to the point where it just felt as if I was getting a flu coming on. I can't really explain it. And the headache was just progressing and eventually turned into a migraine. But later, as the night was progressing, I developed a severe fever. I was throwing up. I was passing out. I could not even make it to my ensuite bathroom. I was gone so weak from the nausea. I couldn't even keep down any electrolytes, any medication. My friend, who was a paramedic, because this was now quite late, because I was told those were normal symptoms. So something in me told me this was getting a bit too much now, especially when I couldn't get out of the bed anymore. So I messaged my friend and he told me, look, these does not sound like what we've been warned about at that time, because I've taken it in 2021. And he told me to just monitor it. So because it was quite late, unfortunately, there was nothing we could do. And I just tried to wait it out. But as the night was progressing, all the symptoms were progressing and new symptoms were popping up. By 3 a.m., I started passing out blood in my urine. And the pain was something I've never experienced before. This was head to toe pain. You couldn't touch my body. The arm that I had been given the shot in, that swelled all the way through to my back. I still have the mark 3 years down the line from the swelling, because the arm turned blue as well. The next morning, I was too ill to go to the doctor. I couldn't move, and I'm not someone who likes doctors. So my husband went to the doctor and he told him what was going on. So the doctor assumed I had a UTI because of the blood that was coming out. So he put me on a lot of medication. Nothing was working. Eventually, I was sent to a urologist. In that week, I was also admitted. I've had a bladder cystoscopy done. Multiple antibiotics were administered, medication, which were making me progressively worse. Nothing was actually helping either the infection, which we thought I had at that time, but the tests were showing there was no bacteria in me. The tests were showing that there was no infections, which is why they took me for a bladder cystoscopy. And the urologist eventually said that I might need a full-time catheter because I was struggling with my bladder. And I told him that makes absolutely no sense. In a week, how does it get so bad? And then we looked into it, and then he decided to send me to a neurologist. And that's when 2 weeks after the vaccination, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia because none of the symptoms have disappeared. It's been 3 years now, and unfortunately, I've been diagnosed since with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I've been diagnosed with central sensitivity syndrome because of the chronic inflammation in all of my organs. My organs, muscles, bones, teeth, nails, absolutely everything hurts. You cannot touch any part of my body that doesn't, clothes, scarf, the hijab, anything will bruise my skin. My skin starts bruising. So there's a lot of symptoms that does not make sense. We've never heard of. And all of the doctors that I've been through, in my case, it was very evident what caused my issues because I have no previous illnesses. And mine started immediately within the same day. And then the next day I was at the doctor. 2 days later, I was in hospital and all of that. However, the doctors, not a single doctor, actually wanted to say that it was the vaccination. A few of them did say it could be linked, but it's a very sticky topic and subject. And because my health was so bad, we needed to focus on my health and not on anything else. And our government did not put out any information. So for me, as a normal person, I had no idea that I had a feeling that this is what it was, but there was no one giving me any validation and telling me that this is what really caused it. And eventually the gaslighting started with the doctors, because now I was being in the first year after the vaccination, the entire first year, I would have been hospitalized almost every 2 weeks, every month. I would just go in and come out. And like Shabnam has said, my experiences are quite similar to her with medication. It pushed me into a depression. It started causing anxiety. It was giving me more side effects than any sort of relief. And being at that time, I was only 37. So being someone that's a mom of 3 boys, I was working, I was at the peak of my career. I was, hands-on with the community, with everything. And now suddenly being either bed-bound or hospital-bound, it was becoming quite difficult. If I had to go out and do anything, if I went out for a day, I would come back for the next 2 weeks, be completely ill or end up in hospital with no explanation to that. So for me, it caused a lot of neurological issues and a lot of invisible issues, which caused a lot of emotional issues. So it didn't just cause, on the outside, it looks like it was just illness. But if you speak to anyone, and I'm amazed that you actually said people are reaching out to you and someone just spoke to you. I'm here in Durban, and believe it or not, up until recently, only when I got the courage to start speaking out and, sharing my story, I still get people telling me, doctors, right? Shabnam was aware 3 months ago, I was hospitalized, had severe attacks and all of that. And the doctors picked up blood clots and all of those issues now that I have. So, but again, the doctors still tell me they don't know how to treat me because I have allergies to even a simple Panado. I cannot even take a simple Panado anymore. I cannot take just any kind of medication. It would either pass me out or some severe allergy. So the doctors told me they don't know how to treat me anymore. And as a result of that, they just keep not even looking into my case anymore. I get dismissed even if I go into hospital. Like if I speak about the incident that I had just 3 months ago, it was a nightmare. I was 4 days in hospital in severe excruciating pain, telling them something's rupturing, and they wouldn't believe me.
Your mic, Inayet.
Yes, Rooksana, can I just stop you there for a minute? Because what I'd like to do is, obviously, I'd like to come back just to look at what sort of support, what sort of help you are getting right now. And clearly, what you are saying is extremely serious. And I'd just like to bring Shukri into the discussion and just to understand from Shukri as well, in terms of taking the shot, why did you take the shot and what are some of your experiences?
Okay, so in a nutshell, my situation was actually quite different from Rooksana's. I was hospitalized with COVID pneumonia in January of 2021. So I spent about 3.5 weeks in a critical care unit, hooked up to oxygen machines, trying to basically stay alive. So that was my first introduction to COVID-19. I come from my family. I have a number of general practitioners and specialists in my family. So I'm fairly well versed in I'd say the Western medical rhetoric. So that was my introduction. I developed COVID pneumonia. I then struggled with long COVID for about 5.5 months thereafter. So when the government brought about the tranches of age-based vaccination drives, my turn came around in was July of 2021. And because I'd been hospitalized, the way the government drove the narrative that you need to protect your loved ones, your family, the elderly, the sickly, the infirm. I thought it was best, obviously, not to potentially, expose my family members to infection, and then also because of my experiences having spent those 3.5 or nearly 4 weeks in hospital with COVID pneumonia, I pretty much felt there was no other choice but to take the vaccination. So my vaccination took place. I had no immediate symptoms other than the general swelling around the vaccination sites, a little bit of a fever for a day or two. But for 4.5, 5 weeks, I seemed to be fairly healthy, everything was normal. And then about a week prior to my second, I had actually taken the Pfizer COVID-19 shot. So a week prior to my second vaccination date, I started noticing lack of sensation in my lower limbs, paralysis in my arms, blurred vision. I started noticing the inability to swallow, struggling to get my words out. I was rushed to hospital by my wife. I was sent back home saying that no, it seemed like it was just a minor infection. Didn't make sense at the time. And about 3 days later, I was rushed back to hospital. I went through a raft of blood tests, CT scans, and eventually a neurologist determined and diagnosed that I was suffering from an autoimmune illness called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which in effect is when your body's immune system turns on itself, and it actually ends up destroying the nerve sheath. It's called a rapidly ascending disease. So it started from my toes. I was completely numb. I had lost sensation in my legs up to my rib cage. I had no control or strength in my arms from my fingertips to the base of my shoulder. And I spent a week at that point in hospital on a treatment plan to try and reverse the onset of Guillain-Barré syndrome, commonly known as GBS. I was then sent to a step-down facility for 6 weeks to learn how to walk again, learn how to talk again, learn how to do basic activities of daily living. So washing your face, brushing your teeth, writing. It was quite a challenge, basically learning to do everything from scratch. After 6 weeks in the step-down facility, I was sent back home to continue with my physiotherapy and occupational therapy. And after 2 weeks at home, I was rushed back to hospital with a relapse in the symptoms. That meant spending another 4 weeks, 3.5 to 4 weeks in hospital, and undergoing the exact same treatment plan as before. That was 3 years ago. As things stand at the moment, I have long-term residual effects because of Guillain-Barré syndrome. So I've got no sensation from my calves down to my feet. So the rest of my body has come back slowly. But I've got constant pins and needles in my lower limbs. I've got constant pain. It basically feels as if you're walking on a bed of nails. I have reduced mental stamina, reduced cognitive skills, so I'm not able to do things as rapidly as I did before. Previously, I've been working as a business consultant in the IT space, and due to the residual effects and of the vaccination, or at least of GBS brought on by vaccination, a lot of my normal daily activities that I used to take for granted are now extremely compromised. My neurologist at the time said off the record that there was a strong possibility that the vaccination was the straw that broke the camel's back. And he put it down to that because I had a severe COVID infection previously. There was strong merit to that. The vaccine caused an onset of an autoimmune illness that came about. Medical proof stipulate and actually state that one of the causes of GBS is an adverse event following a vaccination or an immunization. So my dealings over the last 2.5 years with the Department of Health has been nothing short of diabolical. Shabnam knows me from I think late 2021, early 2022. And I have been trying to fight the battle with the Department of Health to claim compensation because government gazetted in August of 2021 a no basically a no full compensation scheme for all victims or all individuals that suffered adverse events following immunization. What they failed to tell you is that trying to get your condition or your illness recognized or validated is now impossible when your medical professionals are refusing to commit to a diagnosis of vaccine-related injury. Furthermore, trying to engage with various stakeholders in the Department of Health, both from provincial level and a national level, has proven to be extremely problematic. I've had to further my case with the independent information regulator, and that is merely to receive information that related to my case being adjudicated by the COVID-19. Well, they say it's a body that is set up to investigate adverse events, but it's basically been a long-winded roller coaster with no end in sight. As things stand at the moment, it seems as though the government is slowly starting to wake up, although I think they need more pressure from the affected. And when I mean affected, I mean families of the deceased, individuals that have been affected. They need to en masse submit legitimate claims, because there's no way that Department of Health can claim that an injury isn't a legitimate result of the vaccination when they themselves are refusing to acknowledge that the vaccination has had detrimental effects to communities and people in general. So as things stand at the moment, my advice to anybody that has a family member, a friend, a relative that has either suffered adverse events or ill after effects of having received the vaccination, to report it through the government reporting channels and also through organizations similar to what Shabnam runs, and to raise awareness collectively amongst our communities, because it's been 3 years of a battle, and to be totally honest, the one thing the government loves doing, they can do things very slowly, very quick to promote the doing the right thing and getting vaccinated for the best interest of the national interest, but very slow when it comes to addressing individual claims against the very vaccination drive that they promoted on the back of payments from pharmaceutical companies, because I think that's where the big bone of contention lies. The fact that it's a no fault compensation claim for vaccine injuries. So in essence,
Yes.
when you sign that, you are signing away, according to the government, your right to litigate for more substantial compensation claims on the basis that there's no fault being assigned to or attributed to either government or to pharmaceutical companies, which is pretty much scandalous.
Well, clearly, in fact, Shabnam, I think just from what Shukri is talking about, and he speaks about the national interest in this disclaimer on the part of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, we know many governments have actually been held hostage and I spoke about the power of the pharmaceutical industry. And just to give you an idea, in the last 20 years, I did some reading up where the big pharma revenues, in particular, worldwide, totaled $1.48 trillion in 2022. In January 2024, I read a report about the 50 biggest drug makers making up a combined 4.7 trillion in market capitalization. Now, this tells us how powerful this industry is, how much money they make. And often, when I speak of the African continent that has been held hostage, the African continent has been held vulnerable because many of these biggest pharmaceutical companies emanate from Western Europe, from the likes of the United States of America and some of the other countries. And if you look at the African continent, I cited the example of Ebola, where an army, where the military was sent out to fight Ebola. We know a few years ago what had happened in Libya. Muammar Gaddafi, the Belgian doctors, vaccinating children, the whole AIDS issue had actually come up. And this is what I'd like to talk about, is does the African continent, do governments in Africa realize, these crimes committed by big pharma on the African continent, and more importantly, how do they get away with it? Because Shukri speaks about a lack of accountability and this disclaimer that we will vaccinate you, but we are not going to be held accountable or responsible for any consequences.
Shukran, Inayet. I want to start here with by saying that everyone knows someone who's been injured by big pharma. Not everyone realizes they've been injured by big pharma, but I can guarantee you know someone who has been. It's just that people don't connect the dots. And that's largely because big pharma has such a magnificent hold on PR and marketing through the media industries that it sponsors, for example, that it keeps pushing this narrative of safe and effective, and that they really do care about our health. And that's clearly not the case. My own grandmother was taking statins. She was told she needed to take statins for her cholesterol level, which turned out to be an absolute lie. And she told me repeatedly, I don't want to take this tablet. And I didn't realize at that point why she was saying that. It was only when she returned to the Almighty and I did more research into statins, which I handed out like candy, like Smarties to people, in particular our elderly, what it caused: muscle wastage, heart damage, amnesia, and dementia. So we have generations of people taking statins on the pretext that it's for cholesterol and that there's no other way to manage your cholesterol. It's a whole other discussion, that don't need to be taking this drug that is decimating people. And we need to ask ourselves, are our doctors critically being educated to exercise critical thinking? How much of information do they get on nutrition, on exercise, etc.? And how much of their medical program is actually funded by the pharmaceutical industry? Which raises the topic of conflicts of interest. Very important topic as part of this discussion. But I just want to highlight also, alluding to what Rooksana talked about, which is the gaslighting. It is the same type of gaslighting that survivors of child abuse or gender-based violence face, where they're told, was it really that bad? You look fine. I don't see any bruises. Are you sure it really happened? Maybe it wasn't that serious. Maybe you're just imagining it. Maybe you've got a mental condition. Maybe you're looking for attention. It is the same type of gaslighting that people who are reporting to VAERS.co.za are telling us about. They're experiencing that in their interactions with medical professionals, in their interactions with family, with friends, neighbors, co-workers, the general public, government, which is completely ignoring the people whose lives have been decimated by these COVID-19 and other pharmaceutical products. But at that point, let me just mention that there's certainly, with the COVID-19 shots, there are different batches, and some batches are worse than others. So some people who've taken it and they say, I've taken it, I'm fine. Perhaps you were lucky and you got a better batch than other people who are suffering. And to come to the point of political parties that Shukri has raised, it's been incredibly difficult getting through to the political parties in our country, largely because many of them have realized what they have been an instrument of in damaging the health of our nation. There are a few exceptions. We've worked effectively with the NFP, with Sheikh Imam quite specifically, Ahmed Mansour Sheikh Imam, who's an absolute warrior. And we wish him all the best with his health. And then, of course, he started AM4C. So he's been challenging in Parliament on numerous occasions around Big Pharma, the conflicts of interest, the COVID-19 shots, compensation, etc. Interestingly enough, the ACDP as well. The ANC, I did present as part of a panel to the ANC in KZN. They were very receptive. They said they would call us back for another presentation. That didn't happen. We have tried to, I believe there are members of MK who are aware of the realities around these so-called vaccines. But it remains to see who's going to speak out and actually do something about it. And then to talk about Africa and clinical trials in particular, and of course the subject of immunity. So what Shukri is talking about is that the pharmaceutical industry was given indemnity from being sued by the victims and or survivors of their products. And they were given that immunity by governments who signed contracts with them. So Pfizer, for example, tried to sign into the contracts a clause that would give them as security if we didn't pay back the money for these dangerous, unnecessary, and exorbitantly priced products, our country's military bases, embassies, and reserve banks. Pfizer tried to do that, to hold as security these sovereign assets with African countries, with Latin American countries, and perhaps others. Now, former Health Minister William Mkhize said, we didn't sign that aspect of the contract. We refused to sign that clause. But do we really know that to be a fact? There was a case that went to court by the applicant HJI, through which many of these contracts were actually revealed. And Pfizer is very clear in the terms of the agreement, they do not guarantee that adverse effects will not be experienced. So how then can scientists, doctors, journalists, government, anyone claim that these products are safe and effective? And then, of course, if someone wants to claim compensation, there are two ways to do it. They have to go to court, which is costly, it's time-consuming, it's stressful, or they have to apply through what Shukri alluded to, this no-fault compensation scheme, which, by the way, closes in 2027. So if you haven't applied by then, and both our ambassadors will tell you how long the process is, because they don't reply, you get ignored, you get gaslit, and you begin to lose hope until, of course, you meet a community of like-minded people who are advocating for justice and for truth. And so my suspicion is that the money is gone. The money for compensation is gone. The bulk of it is gone. There was a judge appointed to be a part of the commission or committee deciding on these compensation claims. They got rid of that judge because they didn't think they'd receive that many claims. Our last investigations revealed that around 7,000 claims were received as of last year. Most people in our country don't know what's happened to their health, don't know who to talk to apply for compensation, do not speak English, do not have access to smartphones and the computers, do not have access to internet, do not even have access to electricity. So we have people in rural areas, for example, who are suffering immensely, and that is the case across the African continent. So I want to highlight two cases in particular, and then later we'll come back to Palestine and the polio shots. I have provided that article for you. Now, specifically, let's talk about Kenya. I would encourage your audience to watch the film Infertility, A Diabolical Agenda, to understand what happened in Kenya, where the WHO facilitated experiments on the Kenyan girls and women only, who were again, girls and women only, who were told that they were getting tetanus shots. 3 tetanus shots in a period of time. 3, why? Why only girls and women? The Catholic Doctors Association got hold of those vials and investigated, and discovered that those vials were laced with a hormone called HCG, which rendered those girls and those women infertile. So this is part of the eugenics depopulation agenda. And that's not a conspiracy theory. Neither is the New World Order. All the politicians who subscribe to it talk about it openly. And they believe there's too many of us, what they refer to as the useless eaters. And so there's many ways to harm us, to profit from us, and to depopulate, including but not limited to pharmaceutical products. So yes, of course, there are people who will criticize the Catholic Doctors Association's assessment of what happened in Kenya and say, it's not relevant, that's not what happened. But go watch the movie and make your mind up for yourself. Infertilitymovie.org is the website and documents what happened in Kenya. Now, when it comes to Nigeria, here we're talking about a drug called Trovan, and I've supplied the link in the chat as well. And you'll see as far back as 2011, the parents of 4 Nigerian children who died of meningitis became the first winners of a 15-year legal battle against Pfizer over a fiercely controversial drug trial. Pfizer announced that it had made payments of $175,000 to each family, and Pfizer was sued after 11 children died in a clinical trial when Kano, which is the northern state of Nigeria, was hit by Africa's worst meningitis epidemic in 1996, allegedly, right? 100 children were given an experimental oral antibiotic called Trovan, while a further 100 received a gold standard treatment of another medicine. 5 children died on Trovan and 6 on the other one, ceftriaxone. Later, it was claimed that Pfizer did not have proper consent from parents to use an experimental drug on their children, and questions were asked over the documentation of the trial. There was no proper informed consent, which is a legal process, and 100% exactly the same happened in South Africa. There was no proper informed consent. Most people can't even afford to go to court, and imagine, this took 15 years before some of those children received compensation. A legal action filed against Pfizer alleged that some received a dose lower than recommended, leaving many children with brain damage, paralysis, or slurred speech. And so the accountability is just not there. They have so much money that they can out-litigate a victim or a survivor who's seeking justice in our courts, many of which are slanted or biased towards the pharmaceutical industry, which raises the subject of conflicts of interest. Now, in the US and in other countries, you have what is known as a revolving door. So someone works in government, say at the FDA or the CDC, they retire, and then they start working in the pharmaceutical industry, using that influence for pharmaceutical drug approval. Or the other way around, they work at Pfizer, now they're working in government. Or they move into media where they control what the media tells us. You would remember media was singing off the same hymn sheet across our whole country. And I kept asking myself, how are some of the best journalists in our country not asking the critical questions? So I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of accountability, and we'll talk about that further in our conversation.
Yes, Shabnam, and just coming back to Rooksana, and I know Shukri spoke briefly about the role of government as well, and he spoke briefly, Shabnam mentioned about the media as well. But the key issue is to look at where you are at this point in time. And you mentioned 3 months ago, again, obviously there were problems with regard to your conditions, but just looking at the medical fraternity in South Africa. And we know, we've got structures within the medical fraternity. We've got the medical organizations in South Africa, and we have got, quite a robust medical, medical organizations and people represented in those organizations as well. And I'm sure they must have seen a lot. They must have experienced a lot. They must have interacted with people like yourselves a lot as well. And I'd like to know, are these doctors helping in any way? Are they, at this point in time, aware of the harm?
That is one of the most frustrating things, not just for myself. So I know a few friends as well that go to the public government hospital while I go to a private hospital. And I can't tell you whether the treatment is better or worse, except they seem to be getting the only difference with the government hospitals when they go for treatment is that they have to wait for longer days before they get to get their appointments or figure out what's wrong with them. But in the private sector, which I can speak about because that's where I've been in, the hospital that I went to is quite well known. And unfortunately, the doctors knew about it and they've denied it to my face. They've called other nurses, they've called other people to come to me and while I'm in bed and tell me that it's absolute nonsense. There is no such thing at all of any adverse effects, and they would still stand their grounds until I mentioned that, okay, you know what, it was becoming too exhausting fighting with them, especially me not being well. I told them, no problem. Now, from now onwards, I will just give you all's number down to Shabnam Palesa, and you can find out whatever questions you want. But one of the doctors, he turned around and he told me that he took the vaccination and he's in the hospital. He's quite elderly. And he told me that he's never seen this. He's never heard of a case. He's never seen of a case with adverse effects. And I was quite upset because he really traumatized me quite badly in hospital. And what the nurses witnessed what he was doing, and a nurse did come forward and told me very disturbing facts about the hospital, which I'd rather not get into too much detail here right now. However, what I can say is that they were aware that there is adverse effects. There was nurses who's taken the vaccinations as they had to take it because they were frontline workers. They collapsed immediately. I have her details. We speak regularly, and she actually collapsed immediately. She was hospitalized the same day in her uniform, sent home. She gave me stories of 2 other nurses from the very same hospital that the exact similar things has happened, except one of them actually had to amputate her leg. She's not diabetic. They don't know what happened, why her leg just started rotting, and they had to amputate it. But the disappointing thing that really upsetted me with this hospital was they did not even let their nurses acknowledge or validate that it came from the vaccination. The nurses knew as well because 3 of them collapsed immediately taking it while they were just done with it. And they told them there was no such thing. So when I was in hospital, I helped them report their cases. They were not even aware. Being nurses, I cannot understand why they didn't even know that you needed to report these cases. And then I realized if I did not meet Shabnam back in 2022, there was quite a lot of information that I had no idea about. I didn't even know there was a no-fault compensation. Shabnam was the one who told me about that. I just wanted to get it out and get the validation, because without the validation at that time in my mind is I'm not getting the treatment that I needed, because now I'm going in with multiple symptoms. And as many of you all know, in our country, when you have medical aid, if you go in, say, for example, with abdominal pain, that's all they're going to check on. There's very rarely you get doctors that will listen to you where there's other issues and look into that. However, in our cases, we have overlapping issues. It's never, ever just one symptom. In this 3 years, I cannot tell you I've had a single day without a headache. 90% of the time they turn into migraines. But that's just not one symptom. I have GI issues. I have muscle issues. I have spinal issues. I have cognitive issues. I have neurological issues. And those are, basically it affected the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So the entire brain function does not work properly, which is why I have multiple organ issues. But the lack of education from our government, like everybody says, when the vaccination came out, it was all over media. It was all over the news. It was everywhere. But why is no one talking or acknowledging about adverse effects? Here, these are professionals. I'm not talking about laymen or just anybody. These are doctors and nurses in a hospital who has no idea that there is such a thing as reporting, that it's important to report this. It's important, and they don't even know about the no compensation fund. Where is the government? Where is media? Where is everyone? Why is no one talking about this? We are not a few in the minority, because recently a lot of people that I talk about it, they would immediately tell me, I've taken the vaccination and I'm fine. And I do not say anything because I can see and I know most of them personally, and I know their health hasn't been the same. So I keep quiet. And then my next question would be, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I'm like, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know why I'm so fatigued. I'm extra fatigued. Why am I getting the flu so often? Why am I getting so sick so often? People know something is not right, but they're not connecting the dots. And why are they not connecting the dots? Because there's not enough people talking about this. Our government has let us down. They did not come forward and give us the security of letting people know this is what's happening. So people like doctors, and that is something I find very strange, is why do doctors, and these are Muslim doctors, these are well respected doctors I have looked up to, I have admired, I've known them from with family going to them, and they know me for a few years even before getting ill. So they know how I used to be and how I am now, and they just tell me they don't know what's going on and what. But the minute we say the vaccination, it's immediate, full stop. Nobody wants to speak about it. Why?
Well, a very, very good question. Why? And perhaps we can ask Shukri, because Shukri obviously mentioned that he's got a number of members of his family that are obviously in the medical field. But also at the same time, Shukri, as Rooksana pointed out, and also Shabnam, the government, the role of government, the media as well, and also at the same time looking at religious figures, because we know in South Africa, we're not only looking at the Muslim community in particular, we know there has been this huge debate in the Muslim community, not only with the COVID-19 vaccine, but vaccinations in general, whether you should vaccinate or you should not vaccinate. That is, there are two schools of thought in the Muslim community as well. Certain Christian communities are anti-vaccine totally as well, which I am fully aware of as well. And just your thoughts, Shukri, because, Rooksana speaks about the moment you raise this issue about the vaccine, and you basically hit a cul-de-sac or a dead end, and you can't go any further.
Look, I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible, but I think the main issue that I seem to be noticing, although it's not being expressly mentioned, is the fact that, as the word implies, they've been indoctrinated into Western medicine. So most of the medical professionals seem to think, Shabnam mentioned statins as an example, where if you turn that narrative, the way of thinking and the way of prescribing on its head, you actually realize it's more a case of medical professionals being pharmaceutical reps, in essence. The more pills they push, the better it is for them for their practice. They get better rebates and so on and so forth. So from a personal perspective, I've had discussions and I've had heated debates with close family members who are in the medical fraternity, who unfortunately, as Shabnam mentioned, it's normally a bad batch that affects those that have been adversely affected. And the majority of the medical professionals I've spoken to have said, I've had two shots and a booster shot, and I'm 100% fine, and there's nothing wrong with me. You looking a lot better. And I'm like, it's really strange for somebody to be in my mind to tell me that I look and I feel better. So I think the biggest problem is the fact that it's either just blatant denial, or trying to avoid being held liable, because I think if the scales of justice were applied in terms of you weights, you actually put a weighting against the amount of media and broadcasting that was done to promote the vaccination, and on the flip side, it's completely, it doesn't make sense. So for every 10 hours of screen time you had for pro-vaccination, you got less than 10 seconds, if that, 2 seconds of what you need to do if you suffer an adverse event. So for me, it's a case of medical professionals unfortunately seem to be towing the line. It all impacts on their medical registration, their dealings with pharmaceutical companies. Government has a lot of medical professionals towing the line. Look, and I'm not going to paint or tar the entire medical community. There are a number of outstanding medical professionals who've actually stood up and tried to raise their voices, but unfortunately, they're also drowning in bureaucracy. So government looks at all the loopholes to keep dissent in the ranks to a bare minimum, and if anything, try and quell those voices of anger and of disdain towards what government has been promoting for so long. So I think the main issue we find now is the fact that, you know, if you compare where we are now compared to three and a half years ago, with you know, vaccinations kind of out of the picture, people aren't talking about vaccinations anymore. Not necessarily. I mean, there've been instances where they want to bring out newer vaccinations for other you know, illnesses and potential epidemics, like you've mentioned. We've seen things happening across the continent of Africa. But because it's not in the headline news like it was before, with the countdowns that you had on the screens about people dying from COVID-19, and that we need to do our best to vaccinate and make sure the majority is you create a herd immunity. That's, you know, that was the narrative then. But it seems as though the fallout from that is not important. The common threat is, oh, you know what, you're getting older, so that's probably why you're feeling these, you know, these symptoms. It normally happens when you start turning 45, 50, you start having medical conditions that start cropping up. But a lot of these things suddenly cropped up for no apparent reason. So I think, you know, we still need to, as much as certain and a very few people are trying to raise their voices within the medical fraternity, I think, unfortunately, it's towing the, you know, I suppose you could say, both the government and the corporate line, because pharmaceuticals are in it to make, big pharma in it to make money. And unfortunately, it seems to be that two things that make the world go round in terms of, you know, capitalism is war and death. So it doesn't pay to treat and save lives. It pays to create more death, because death seems to keep the dollar floating nice and high, so everybody else must suffer, because life is cheap, unfortunately. That's seems to be the general trend, both within government as well as with big pharma. So yeah, it's just something that we need to concentrate on and not stay silent and continue the fight. I think that's the most important thing.
Well, Shukri, very important what you say in terms of life is cheap, and we see it with the military-industrial complex, and we see what is playing out in Gaza as well, how cheap the lives of the people of Palestine, the children of Palestine, and I'm sure the pharmaceutical industry exactly the same. Life is cheap. Now, Shabnam, we have been talking about our very own government. We have been talking about, and you mentioned you reached out to political parties, you know, from an accountability perspective as well, and to highlight these issues. We know that COVID-19 was an international issue. And on an international level, we had this entire push in terms of vaccines and for people to be vaccinated. But just looking at, we are having this discussion right now. I'm not too sure whether this debate, this discussion is taking place in other parts around the world or even on an international level. What are the latest developments internationally for accountability, you know, from these pharmaceutical companies?
Shukran, Inayet. Certainly, there are massive developments internationally, including court cases and developments in parliaments, which I want to get to in a sec. But you've spoken about Palestine, and it's important to talk about these polio shots. Experimental polio vaccines rolled out to hundreds of thousands of children in Gaza. Now, Children's Health Defense covered this particular story with an interview between Polly Tommy and Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. At that stage, over 187,000 children under the age of 10 were vaccinated, and 600,000 more since then. And Dr. Humphreys asks very specific questions. Now, you would remember what we were told is they found polio in wastewater, and that one child was apparently diagnosed with having paralysis. And Dr. Humphreys says there could be many causes to this. There's the fact that the water is contaminated. There's no proper sewage system. Bombs which are full with toxins are falling on people. Exploding buildings that often have asbestos in them, targeting even chemical factories that could be releasing all of these contaminants. So do we really know that this is actually polio? And does it make any sense that the ITF would and the occupied Palestine Israel government would suddenly care about the children of Palestine and allow these products through when they are not allowing the basic amenities of life, including water, food, and medicine, and of course, psychological care. And so Dr. Humphreys wrote a book called Dissolving Illusions, Diseases, Vaccines, and Forgotten History. So she really is an expert. And she was absolutely incensed because the NOPV2 vaccine is genetically modified, right? And what we also know is that vaccine-derived polio, there's more cases of vaccine-derived polio than wild virus polio. So it is evidence to suggest that the vaccines are often given in drops to developing countries. For some reason, it's a different type that they give us, has caused enormous adverse effects around the world, including India and the DRC. I would urge people to look into what these polio products have done in that part of the world, and certainly to watch the interview with Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. The oligarchy, or the parasite class as I prefer, has many ways to harm us. So it's injections, it's weapons of mass destruction in wars or genocides, more accurately. It's GMO in our food. It's the microplastics that have, infected our environments, our water, our soil, our air. There's many ways for them to harm us, and certainly Big Pharma is one of them. It's part of the military-industrial complex. If you think about why Big Pharma, Pfizer, would say to a country, listen, you want our product? Okay, but as security, we want your military bases, your embassies, and your reserve banks. Does that not indicate that the pharmaceutical industry is part of the military-industrial complex? And, Africa is on a mission now to liberate itself from corporate colonialism. We see what's happening in the Sahel region, for example. Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Senegal, etc., are kicking out these corporations that are exploiting them. So what's one way to derail this march towards economic liberation? It's to make people sick. And again, these are all the weapons at their disposal. So I want to come back to some of these developments which you asked about, Inayet, and they include that evidence has emerged that, one, these injections are genetically modified, in other words, GMO, right? Secondly, no proper application and registration process has been followed in any part of the world, affirming that, look, this product is GMO, now we want to go through a proper GMO application process with your country before approval is passed. This has not happened. So again, there is no informed consent on the part of the people taking these products, because governments just said, emergency use authorization, GMO, no GMO, batches, no batches, we don't care. You don't want us to test it? No problem, we won't test it either. So this is what our governments have done. And in addition to the fact that these products contain and or are genetically modified, there's evidence that emerged that these products are causing contamination to the human genome, to the DNA of us as human beings. In fact, World Council for Health held an event this week on Monday with Dr. David Speaker, who presented the evidence that he's done on DNA contamination. So now not only is there the issue of GMO, there's also DNA contamination, and they explain exactly how they got to this conclusion. Then there are other scientists that I've interviewed who have proven, showing through microscopy, that they are unidentified objects within the vials. They don't know what these objects are. And you might remember Aspen had to throw away about local Aspen, which, by the way, was caught price gouging by the European Commission on cancer drugs. So that's the Aspen I'm talking about. They had to throw away 2 million vials of potentially contaminated vials that J&J had asked them to fill and finish. So we're talking about all sorts of issues, from manufacturing misconduct to malicious intent. If you look at DNA contamination and GMO, these products are not even tested to see whether they were possibly carcinogenic, whether they would cause infertility issues. And despite that, they were just given to pregnant women. What we are seeing at VAERS, we are seeing miscarriages. We are seeing children who are incredibly ill. We are seeing the economic impact of people who are unable to work. Trillions, it's costing our economy. If 1 in 4 people is chronically ill, has an acute injury such as a disability, or has died as a breadwinner, that's a loss to our economy. So what happens? Pfizer can then say, oh, you can't pay us back. Remember the agreement we signed? It's actually quite diabolical. There are also court cases on the GMO. There is a case going on in Australia, led by fellow lawyer Julian Gillespie, Katie Ashby Coppins, and others. There is also a hearing that took place in Australia, where in that county of Australia, they've now said they're releasing an instruction to all of the medical facilities to stop administering these injections based on all of these concerns. And what are our governments doing? Nothing. What is South African government doing? Nothing. Why? SAHPRA, the Health Products Regulatory Authority, is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? They're funding the backlog project at SAHPRA, which is why SAHPRA was blocking access to other medicines that could help, medicines we can't talk about because of censorship. Similarly, the HPCSA, Health Professions Council, is persecuting South African doctors who are speaking out and saying, hang on, we are seeing adverse effects out of these injections. We have concerns. So Transformative Health Justice, which is one of the organizations we work through, was asked by a group of 100 doctors and healthcare workers to facilitate a letter to the government and to SAHPRA and SAMA and HPCSA and all of these organizations, which accept funding from the pharmaceutical industry. Their jobs depend on it. And that letter was completely ignored. We did attach that letter in a court case, which we called Stop the Shots. And that case was dismissed, despite the evidence, testimonies from doctors, clinical evidence, evidence on conflicts of interest, research, court cases, you name it. We provided the evidence, and that case was dismissed. So the pharmaceutical industry has an enormous grip. In fact, when I asked the former health minister, Dr. William Kize, why that particular product that can't be named was being blocked by SAHPRA, is it because of A, B, or C? And I asked about conflicts of interest, and he said, no, we shouldn't accuse SAHPRA of anything, of any foreign interference in our country, because the truth is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funds every government department. So this is how far their tentacles extend. And our universities are the same. They're funding those programs. The scientists running research products funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So the entire system is corrupt and toxic. And the people paying the price is us. A couple of other points I want to make before turning it back to you. On the subject of the exploitation of the African continent through clinical trials, it's because our governments don't actually care. The standards are so low. Any company can say, I want to come into a clinical trial. Where should I do it? Let's do it in Africa. Let's do it in India. Let's do it in Latin America, because we can get away with violating fundamental human rights. Having said that, India was perhaps the only country that said to Pfizer, if you want to sell your product here, we need to test it first. Pfizer said no. India said, then you're not selling your product here. So certainly there are precedents in other parts of the world. And like Rooksana, I've also interviewed a whistleblower nurse who was telling us what is happening inside our hospitals. So not only are COVID-19 patients being mistreated and abused in terms of being kept on their face for 14 days at a time, put on ventilators, which damage their lungs even further, given toxic drugs like remdesivir, which has a 50% mortality rate, was used for Ebola, giving those drugs to COVID-19 patients. This is causing the high levels of death that we've seen throughout the COVID-19 era. In addition, she told me that vaccine injury victims are treated atrociously. They're not treated properly. They're not taken seriously. And so we have a serious problem within our hospitals as well, and that's public or private, which is why we need to take responsibility for our own health. And I would certainly encourage people in South Africa to report adverse effects from any of these injections, not only the COVID shot, to SAVAERS.co.za, SAVAERS.co.za. We're also developing a system for Africa called AFVAERS, where anyone in an African country can report their experiences and be taken seriously by us. We can release data to the public, but we can also interview people, because it's not just about data. It's about the lived experiences of people like Rooksana and Shukri.
Shukran for that, Shabnam. And just to bring Rooksana back into the discussion, Rooksana, I'd like to focus a bit on compensation, because we've heard earlier on, we're talking about compensation, and I'm sure the government obviously not doing a lot. As Shabnam mentioned, there isn't a lot of report coming through, even through the mainstream media in terms of compensation. But I'm sure that is an avenue that needs to be explored, but also looking at what sort of experience, how easy, how difficult, how complex is this process of applying for compensation.
In one word, nightmare. Absolute nightmare. I mean, so for me, what I initially did, because my adverse effects started within hours of the vaccination, and I've been in and out of hospital. So I've taken it in August 2021. From September 2021, they were the numbers and email addresses that were provided behind the vaccination card for reporting adverse effects, which I have done repeatedly. And there was not a single response. And then my health was so bad, gone few months. There was a point where I couldn't even hold a pen. I could not even hold my phone in my hand. It was too sore and it was too much of issues. So I just started focusing on my health. And then I met Shabnam, and then she told me about that. And then she told me about the forms, and she sent me the forms in 2022, which I have applied again. I have reported it from 2022. And again, it was completely ignored. There was no response. There was nothing. And again, unfortunately, my health has been so bad that I did not have time to really focus on that. I had to focus on my health. And in that time, I was still emailing back and forth, whoever I could, whichever email addresses we find. But there was not a single, not from SAFRA, not from the AEFL, not from the government, not from any of the bodies that were in charge of these adverse effects or reporting. And then eventually, at the beginning of this year, I met a friend online, and she was actually doing law. And she needed to take the vaccination to write the bar exam. And she got ill from that and couldn't complete her law. So she does have a lot of law background. And she's been amazing, because with that, she managed to find a lot of high official government email addresses through her friends and through her sources. She's based in Johannesburg. And she shared them with me. And we said, let's spam them. So between this lady and myself, we started spamming them. We would email them every week. And eventually I did get a response. And that's when I told them, you know what, I've been reporting this from 2021. From 2021 to date, I am footing the bill for absolutely everything. And anyone, if you go and do anything, it is absolutely expensive. And on my behalf, I can't do medicine. So I had to go on the natural holistic side, which sometimes, actually most of the time, sometimes do cost a lot more. So that really caused a lot of strain. So I started putting more pressure. We started looking for more email addresses. We started looking for whoever in the government, whoever had a link in with these cases or anything, we would start emailing them. So eventually I threatened, I'm not going to die. I did tell them, I'm really done with you guys. And they blatantly told me that they do not have any record from 2021 of me reporting it. And I have proof of my emails. And then I told them that I have interviews lined up. And I'm going to speak about this because the public has a right to know. If there is a no compensation fund for the people that were affected by this, so people need to know, because I was not even aware of this. But like Shabnam says, in our country, half the population cannot afford the basic necessities. They need the funds. We were unfortunate, and alhamdulillah, that I have amazing family, amazing support. So everybody comes together and they really help me. Shabnam has an amazing organization with Stop the Shots. And there's quite a bit of doctors that took over with my case, and they really helped me a lot. So they've put me on a lot of natural products now that I'm using to combat all my side effects. And alhamdulillah, there is a huge improvement, but it's going to take a while, because I was explained that I have a lot of damage in my system and with all of that. But going forward, when I was in hospital, it so happened that the Department of Health called me Now this is months. I've reapplied for the 100th time. I think end of January, February. So in July. In July, I finally got a call, and that was after me telling them I have interviews set up with Shabnam. And other people, if people's gonna ask me, I'm going to say the truth, what's going on. So eventually they sent me a representative from the department, and they called me and they asked me when can they meet with me, and I told them, look, I'm in hospital, critically ill, and I do not know when I'm going to be out. Please come and meet me in this hospital, because by that time that was also going to be proof to the doctors and the hospital that if I'm having representatives coming from the Department of Health, this is real, that I'm not making this up, because they've tried to label me with a lot of mental illnesses only because they could not figure out what was wrong, and because I refused to back down on what caused this. So when they saw that, things got a lot heated from there, which I won't go into details. But she came in, and she came in with two other representatives, and they did an interview. They took in a lot, and then they needed information. They needed all of the hospital records. They needed all the doctors. 90% of my doctors I do not have, either because some of them didn't want to treat me, or I cannot no longer afford just going to all these specialists, because I need a cardiologist, I need a gastroenterologist, I need a gynecologist, I need a neurologist, I need a urologist. These are all issues that I have on a daily basis. So going to these specialists, most of them do not take medical aid anymore. They want cash up front. So that makes it very difficult. So now I have to pick and choose who I want to go to, which symptom is more urgent and needs more immediate relief. So when they came, then we called the management from the hospital, and we told them that they need my records from 2021, because I was admitted immediately since that. And I have proof that, and this links it up. With me, there's no brainer, there's no question about everything, because it was everything within the same week of taking it. The hospital turned and told me that they have a POPI Act, and they're not allowed to release any of the documents or anything. And I needed to pay 450 Rand to get my own documents, which I did, because the government officials that came through, they told me they didn't know how to access that, because the hospital says they have a POPI Act that protected them. And because it was such old records, it's gone in the archives, and it's going to take some time to get through. But I needed to pay 450 Rand to retrieve those, which my husband did do, which took them to date. Most of my information has not been sent yet, even from the hospital. But the government hospitals, later on, when I went to my friend who has the law knowledge, and I told her, I have seen over 20 specialists in this 3 years. I cannot go and pay 450 Rand to 20 different people to get my records coming from 2021. That is just ridiculous and a waste of money. Why must I foot the bill for something that's not even my fault? So then she went and she found a form that bypasses the POPI Act, which the government should have known. You are representatives of the Department of Health. You should have had knowledge of this form. Why did I have to go and find this? Then I eventually sent it to them, and they are now using that. So as far as my knowledge is, because they ignore us, if we give them a call, or if there is no numbers to call, but I got lucky with one of the representatives, and she just tells me that they are sitting with reports from 2021, and it's going to be a very, very long time before we get any sort of answers or we get anything, because it's a very, very heavy procedure. It needs to go to one set of doctors, and they need to approve it. Then it goes to the national doctors, and there's a whole lot of procedures. So I told her, in my case, I cannot speak about other cases. In my case, it's open and shut, given especially with the events that were unfolding in this 3 years. I have all my records, I have everything. There's nothing that needs to be a guessing. And she told me with this that there are many like me, and they are also sitting from 2021. So regarding the compensation, we just know I was lucky finally to start getting some correspondence, but a lot of people are not getting any response. A lot of people are not getting any help. And another frustrating part is another friend of mine. She's about 60 years old, and she also, I helped her with her process of reporting this year. And when she filled in her form, so she's done the carpal tunnel operation on her hands, and she's got lupus, and she's doing chemo right now. So she cannot even hold a pen. She cannot write. She had to go to church, get the pastor's assistant, someone to help them, and fill in these forms. And these are a lot to fill in there. So they filled in the form, they sent in the form, they sent it back and told her 3 times already. And I've seen the writing. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. Anyone and everyone can read it. And they told her they cannot understand it. They cannot understand it, and she needs to rewrite it. So then I gave her a few other addresses, and I told her, send an email and tell them this is your situation and what they need to do. So right now we actually managed to bypass her with that, but it's just a waiting game. Where this goes, only Allah knows. But right now, there is no correspondence from them. There is no definite, when we find out, ask them, like with the road accident fund, there is a time frame. That's when you endanger, your life is in danger. There is a time frame because you need treatment in that process, in that time. Likewise with us, we've been injured, and a lot of us are quite critical. There's people that are bedridden, that cannot do anything. What are we supposed to do in this time? How are we supposed to cover our bills, get the treatment that we need? Who is going to help us with all of this? And the government, no one is listening to anything.
Yes, Rooksana. In fact, Shukri, just your experience on compensation. Have you explored compensation for the conditions that you have suffered?
So, in a nutshell, my I'd say a journey with the Department of Health commenced in February of 2022. As Rooksana mentioned, and Shabnam will attest to, it's a long, laborious exercise where you are constantly trying to emails bounce. You try and phone numbers don't exist. You send an email, you send a read receipt, you chase it up with another follow-up email a week to 2 weeks later, and it's basically rinse and repeat. You've got to do it consistently. It's actually a full-time job, and when your health is compromised, it actually becomes more psychologically, physically, emotionally, and psychologically taxing on you, so that it feels as though you're having to do all of this to get no response. And it seems as though the longer they keep you, your cries fall on deaf ears. They keep you at a distance so they don't actually resolve any of your issues. So long story short, I submitted all my information, or requested, submitted my claim for compensation in February of 2022. It took me about 7 months to get my medical records from the private hospitals collated and then forwarded through to Department of Health. They work through a provincial cluster, which then goes through to a national cluster, which then gets through to apparently it's something called NISEC, a National Immunization Safety Expert Committee. And this is basically an independent ministerial advisory committee that meets to provide scientific advice and recommendations to the Department of Health and SAPRA. The problem is the members of that NISEC committee are unknown. I've requested from government over the course of the last 2 years the exact details of the members of that committee, what their affiliations are, is there any conflict of interest, who is funding the NISEC committee, and so on and so forth. Basically, I've had no response to that question. Eventually, I received an email out to the blue in, I think it was early this year, to say that my case was, what they regard as causality. So the cause of your adverse event was determined to be indeterminate, so they couldn't put it down to the vaccine. I asked them, so how did they come to that assessment? That took about 4 or 5 months to get an answer that they're not at liberty to divulge how they came to the assessment. I then requested my dossier, the file, that allowed them to make that determination. They refused to present that to me. I then had to go to the information regulator to do a PIA application to actually force the Department of Health to provide me with my very case dossier that allowed them to determine that my cause of adverse event was indeterminate. After mediation with the information regulator, I was finally issued with the information. A lot of the stuff was basically very general and redacted. And so therefore there was no real clear, concise thread of, the decision-making process that you could actually derive any sort of satisfaction from. In a nutshell, I get an email about, 2 months ago, stating that, they've decided to award me compensation for temporary disability. And I was like, but this is a long-term event. It's not temporary. My ability to work full-time is compromised. I can't do things that I took for granted before. And they said, no, based on, their determination, I've had to, because prior to that email, I actually sent an appeal for clarity on why my causality has been deemed as indeterminate. And then it seems as though it's a throw of the dice with them. They decided to present me with compensation for temporary disability, which is now another process that's taking about 3 months. So it's been about 2 years of back and forth, fighting with the legal team from Department of Health. They don't know, one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing within the various departments. In actual fact, I sent through the PI application through to the Director General of the Department of Health. I've been inundating people with emails. Emails have bounced. I've CC'd in Shabnam on a lot of my emails, so that she's aware of the journey that I've taken. So in essence, I've actually had more success than Rooksana's had in her endeavors, but it has been a very long-winded process. 2022, so it's basically 2.5 years later that I've been no clearer to any sort of real meaningful compensation. They've based temporary disability on a fixed rate of 5,000 Rand per month for 6 months. And I explained to them that my medical bills in the first year of diagnosis way exceeded a 30,000 payment. So it seems as though it's more of a payment to kind of pay for your silence. So it's a case of you've got to be steely, determined, stubborn, but it is very taxing because my health has suffered. I've gone through periods of depression. It's been a long battle, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem as though that battle is coming to an end now. So it's still onwards and upwards, and continue to push and push hard against the powers that be. Because if one person can make a chink, make a little chink of light in that very high wall that the government has put up to prevent compensation being awarded to the thousands of victims, because I know it's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people. As Shabnam and Rooksana have mentioned, it's not a case of, there's a clear definition of you being, adversely affected. A lot of people have found their health to be severely compromised since taking the jabs. So it's not a one size fits all, unfortunately. So in a nutshell, it's been extremely difficult.
Shabnam, yes, Shukri, certainly. Shabnam, obviously time is of the essence, and it's amazing that we've been talking for the last 90 odd minutes or so already, and there's just so much more ground to cover. But I just think you mentioned the VAERS project and extending this project to the African continent as well. And here, a number of issues that we'd like to talk about is, number one, is should people lose hope? And particularly those that are seeking treatment for drug related harm that has been caused to them. But also at the same time, I'm going to combine a few questions in one for you, and you can look at it. Looking at these predatory corporations that we spoke about in my introduction, big pharma, in terms of how do we deal with them? Does anything need to change? And more importantly, we're talking about Vaccine Injury Month in October, which has been announced. Okay, what more can people do? Because I know that there have been a number of publications, there have been some of the movies that your organizations has made to encourage people to make informed decisions, and just generally looking at people being informed and also being supportive of an organization or the type of work that you are doing.
Shukran, Inayet. We value your patience and your compassion very, very much. So firstly, one never gives up hope. Whether one is a believer in God, the Almighty, or not, we never give up hope. And courage is certainly contagious, and these conversations we're having are certainly going to give hope to so many people in our country and around the world. And we're aware that the experiences that we're talking about now are replicated in hundreds of thousands of people around the world. Professor Denny Ranku from Canada extrapolated that 17 million people have died post the COVID-19 shot. 17 million. And so governments are certainly have an interest in covering up. And certainly we have to talk about the broader agenda of why this cover up is happening in follow-up shows. And we'll bring one of our colleagues, Fahri Hassan. He and I teach a course on conflicts of interest, and we'll be able to dig in that a lot more. But there certainly are detox protocols that are available in South Africa, where we're working with experts who are developing detox protocols on the African continent, where we have developed a project called the African Natural Health. So we're working with experts across the continent and internationally, where research studies are going on to encourage people to try a protocol and then report to say what kind of effect this protocol is having on your health. And then we can develop research-based outcomes to assist people, not only from these shots, but from any other. And so this is very, very important work, because we know they're going to tell us now it's Mpox, then it's Ebola, then it's Marburg, and create a climate of fear so that people take whatever is pushed in their direction. But I think they're going to find it very hard this time, because one, people are injured, and two, people are far more awake than they were in 2020. In terms of Vaccine Injury Month, which, as you rightly pointed out, is October. So the three organizations that we work through, Transformative Health Justice, World Council for Health South Africa, and Children's Health Defence Africa, supported by the African Sovereignty Coalition, are announcing 5 different activities in tribute to Dr. Jackie Stone, who gave up her life in an act of suicide because she was being persecuted by those who have enormous influence through their money. She was taken to court 27 times for recommending treatments that work. And also because she was speaking out about these injections and the impact on them of health and dignity and life. And so rest in peace, Dr. Jackie Stone. So we are announcing a Dr. Jackie Stone Healer Award for healers who create protocols that help the vaccine injured with their physical and mental health challenges. There are 3 categories: natural health focused, innovative solutions, and most affordable. The reality is most people can't afford the detox protocols that they need, and so we need to find protocols that are more affordable for certain people in particular. So that's the Dr. Jackie Stone Healer Award. Secondly, the best protocols will be compiled into a research-based study that we will release to the public. Thirdly, we are appealing for support to assist the vaccine injured with their medical needs, like essential medication and mental health counseling. So please do reach out to us via thj.info@thj-africa.org.za, or donate directly via the website thj-africa.org.za if you can help. Fourthly, we are launching a TRC on COVID-19. You might remember the TRC on apartheid. This is the Truth and Restoration Commission on COVID-19, which will hold provincially and in our different cities, and we'll hear testimonies from the survivors of these shots, from the survivors of lockdown, which, by the way, government had no right in international law to declare. In international law, the state of emergency that was declared is actually unlawful. And we'll discuss that in another event, because certainly they're going to aim at other lockdowns as well. We'll also hear testimonies from healthcare workers who are being persecuted for speaking the truth, as well as scientists, lawyers, activists, and media. We'll be filming a documentary series during this TRC on COVID-19, which we will share internationally. And we will, during that process, hold workshops on informed consent and do film screenings. For example, a recent film just released that we made right here in South Africa called Big Pharma Shots. And there are others around the WHO, which is a hugely controversial organization. There's a whole movement to exit the WHO, and we'll talk about that in a follow-up show as well. And finally, we're announcing a research study comparing the health of vaccinated and unvaccinated children. So if anyone would like to get involved in these activities or to support, please do contact us via the website, thj-africa.org.za, or just WhatsApp me, 074-874-2291. And please do support our work. Government has no right to make decisions without our consent. Without public participation, no decisions should be made. As we say in Africa, nothing for us without us. And certainly what needs to change is, one, public participation in all decision making. Secondly, no contracts are signed giving away our money to these corporations, which are malevolent and predatory, without our consent. Thirdly, government cannot sign any contract that gives immunity or indemnity for harm that's been caused to our people. And fourthly, we need to invest radically in our health, and that includes, perhaps most importantly, natural health, because that is where our power is as the African continent, as in other parts of the world. So please do support our work. We would like to hire people to assist survivors and the families of victims with applications for compensation. And if you do support us, we'll be able to hire people to assist people who are really struggling. And thank you so much for this opportunity, Inayet. It's been really valuable, and I'm sure it's going to make a difference.
Well, shukran for that, Shabnam. And, sadly, we've come to the end of the discussion, and I'm sure there's still a lot more ground to cover, but I'm sure we will be hosting future discussions on this particular issue. And I'm sure, Shabnam, you will keep us informed from time to time. To you, Rooksana, Reyazzudin, and also to you, Shukri, Arnold. We say Jazakallah, shukran to you. We wish both of you all the best, your health conditions as well. Our prayers, our du'as are with you. Allah grant you and everybody else, recovery, shifa as well, and complete recovery from your illnesses and all the difficulties that you are experiencing. But more importantly, we thank you. We say Jazakallah to both of you for having the courage as well to come to talk to us and to share your experiences with us. So all the best to both of you, and to you, Shabnam, as well. I know this discussion was long overdue. Quite a few weeks ago, you and I had this discussion, but I'm glad we had this discussion, and we thank you as well. And please keep us informed, and inshallah, looking forward to future discussions. So to all of you, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Well, that brings us to the end of, I must say, it's a very, very interesting discussion that requires a lot more information, but also at the same time, I think we've covered a fair amount of ground to provide quite an overview and a detailed overview as to where we are at this point in time. And we've been saying this for a very, very long time. And let us not only just talk about COVID-19, but we're just talking about the power of corporations in a general. And right at the outset, we spoke about these predatory corporations. We spoke about the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma, but also the collusion that sometimes takes place between the banking industry, companies like Monsanto, as we mentioned, genetically modified foods, big banks, all of them, the military industrial complex as well, all of this together. And we know this has been going on for a very, very long time. These are huge. These are mega trillion organizations right across the entire world. And it's necessary to have these discussions because at the end of the day, it is in the public interest, and you are playing with people's life, people's health, and as Shabnam spoke about, keeping an eye out on Palestine in general. Now, with the outbreak of polio, I shudder to think what the situation may be with regard to these vaccines that are being dished out. And you will recall a few weeks ago when we held a discussion on Gaza and Israel not allowing medicine into the Gaza Strip, and what they had sent as an insult to the people of Palestine. They sent COVID vaccine kits. When COVID has long gone, this is what they send to the people of Palestine. We will continue having these type of discussions right here on Salam Media. And as always, it's an absolute pleasure being in your company, our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. Once again, we thank you. So for now, let's sign off. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.